Thank you, Dr. Merrill, for conducting this interview with us. At first, how will you define our field? Do you define it as educational technology or instructional technology, and why?
Well, I think it's a good question. I think my first response to that is yes. I think that it could be either one. But the problem is both of the terms, educational or instructional, have all kinds of meanings, and so it depends a little bit who you talk to. My own interest is in instructional technology because my interest is how do we make instruction effective, efficient, and engaging, and I think that should be the primary focus of the field. However, I have to recognize that this field involves much more than that. I mean, it involves the use of technology in many, many other areas. And so educational technology would suggest the uses of technology by students as tools, as problem-solving tools like Jonathan used to talk about, or using technology for doing research. So educational technology can include all of those things. And I think as a field, the Association for Educational Communications and Technology, I think, is probably that broader definition. But for me, at least, I think the foundation ought to be instructional technology, meaning the use of technology to promote efficient, effective, and engaging learning. And so, and with the rise of constructivism and some of these other areas, people say, well, learners should be involved. They have, undirected learning, discovery learning, all this kind of stuff, which I think, by the way, is not instruction. I think that's something else. It's called promoting learning, but not really instruction. For me, instruction is a goal-oriented activity where I have a deliberate goal to accomplish, some learning goal to accomplish. Whether the student sets that goal or we set the goal or a corporation sets that goal, it's goal-driven. And we want to be as efficient and effective as possible and engaging as possible to get students to acquire that goal. And so for me, that's what instruction is. But I know that's a very narrow definition compared to all the various things we do in the field. So I suppose the bigger circle is educational technology. Within that is instructional technology. And for me, I want to stay inside that narrower circle.
Thank you. And secondly, when you think about the past and the future of our field, how do you think the future will be in our field? What's the future of our field? Is there a future or not?
Well, as I said at the beginning of this little symposium we just had, I have no idea what the future is going to hold. As a graduate student back in 1964, we were sending messages back and forth across the room on ARPANET, which was the forerunner of the Internet. I wish I had had the insight at that point in time to realize that every one of us were going to have it on our telephone someday, and to be able to do that. That was far from our imagination at that point in time. So, I've been around this field for a long, long time, and I've seen so many changes in the hard technology, and the use of computers. And the very fact that you're sitting here with a notebook-sized pad taking a video of our conversation is beyond comprehension, So who knows what will be next in the technology? It's just, obviously gets more and more amazing. Somebody just showed me a little teeny thumb drive that was probably smaller than a postage stamp with 60 gigabytes of storage on it, And I remember having a great big disk when I was in graduate school. It was probably 3 feet or 2.5 feet in diameter, had a big handle on it. You put it in the disk drive and turn it like this, and I think the total memory on that was something like 16K. Each bit was like a 1/4-inch square on this thing. I mean, it's incredible, the technology. Unfortunately, I think on the other side of the coin, when it comes to understanding instruction and understanding learning, we've made some progress. There certainly has been some advances made in brain psychology or brain physiology and other things. But I think as far as the actual understanding we have of how to be effective instruction, we have not made a lot of progress. And I think that's kind of discouraging. We tend to grab the next technology. There's the side of the field that's the next technology is the new panacea. It's going to change. It's going to fix all the problems of the world, and that, of course, never will happen, because to go back to Dick Clark's presentation here, about the 30 years of the truck carrying the stuff. The technology is a vehicle. It's a tool. And it's what we put in the technology that's going to make the difference. So for me, my interest, even though I played with technology, computer-based instruction, and a lot of different things, my interest has always been what makes the instruction work, whatever the technology. And so I completely agree with Clark's conclusion, and so does the research, that show me what's in your closet, and I'll show you how to use it more effectively. That's always been my mantra. I don't care what technology you're using. You tell me what you have available, what you want to use, and I'll show you how to use it better than you're using it by effective instruction.
Actually, my next question is Clark-Kozma debate, but you have already answered it. Are there any thing you mention about our field, or you give advice to grad students?
Well, I guess I would quickly summarize. Get on my website, mdavidmerrill.com, and look for Write Your Dissertation First and other essays on a graduate education, and you'll find about 10 or 12 little essays about my advice to graduate students. It's partly tongue-in-cheek, but it's also partly very serious. And so my advice to graduate students, I guess the number one bottom line is direct your own education. Don't let it be directed for you. When you go to graduate school, you ask the questions. You make the, you know, obviously you'll have to meet somebody's requirements and you have to jump through the hoops, as Sharon said, but you direct your own instruction. You direct what you want to do. You ask the questions. You push the envelope so that you become the proactive member of your thing. And then within that, there's lots of things you can do. Some of my little essays are cute. One of them, Write Your Dissertation First, is serious. You know, one of the lines that I get quoted from some of my graduate students, I said, a good empirical dissertation could be done in a weekend. And they always say, what? You know? But my point was, if you ask your question first and you work through the first 2 or 3 years of your graduate program studying that question, by the time you get ready to collect data, you should have already developed some materials. You should already have done a lot of research on the literature. You should also know what the major issues are. You should be able to put together a data collection instrument, and if it's an experimental study, you know, that you could do that experimental study in a weekend, and then the next weekend maybe to write it up. But I think this idea that we need to take a year doing a dissertation is crazy. That's one of the ideas. There's several other ideas in there. One of the other ideas in there is writing is thinking. I think you don't really understand a particular point of view or idea unless you've written about it. And so, you know, as students come to me, they say, well, I've thought a lot about my problem. I've really been thinking about it. I said, yeah, well, show me. What do you mean, show me? Show me what you're thinking. Well, no, I just been thinking. I said, no. If you haven't been writing, you haven't been thinking. And so there's a whole bunch of little essays in there that are my advice. So the best thing is that it's about 96 pages of advice for graduate students.
And my last question is about your first principles of instruction. You make a bit change in your last book, the third book of the Green Book, as
Right.
mentioned in our field. And there are some differences and similarities with 9 Events of Instruction by Robert Gagne.
Gagne.
How do you mention it? Is there similar or different? And there are some points he didn't mention, but you mentioned them. Actually, this was our qualification exam question.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
So, well, obviously I was strongly influenced by Robert Gagne, probably more than any other person in the field. I read his Conditions of Learning in 1965 when it was in draft form, the very first version of it. And was a friend of Bob until his death. Loved to interact with him. He had probably more influence on me than anybody else. But I felt like that he didn't go far enough in some areas, and I've written papers about that. And he and I wrote a couple of papers together about that over time. And so I didn't really try to deliberately build on it, but it certainly is reflected in that. My own work on first principles kind of has evolved since 2002 when I published the first paper on it, but it was really an extension of elaboration or of component display theory before that. And so in first principles, over that 10-year period from the time that I wrote that first article until I finished the book, I talked to a lot of people. A lot of people were trying to use these ideas. And I said that there's a difference between principles, and people read that first article, they say, oh yeah, I'm doing that. And then I look at their work and they say, not according to me, I don't think they're doing that. And so, you know, it's easy to take a principle and think you're using it. So I said, what I need to do then is go one next step and say, here's a set of guidelines about how to use those principles. but it is a set, one possibility, not all possibilities. So the book is really a way to apply first principles, not the way to apply first principles. And I tried to show how that could be done in a very detailed way, because I'm a kind of a educational engineer to begin with. I like to give people direct, I don't like fuzzy stuff. I like the people to tell them what to do. And then third, I presented, probably 170 different examples of instruction in there to try to illustrate, okay, once you apply these guidelines, what does it look like in real life? So those are what I tried to do. There is a little comparison in chapter 2 or 3 between Dick and Carey's model and what we've done there. When I talk about Pebble in the Pond, there's a paragraph at the beginning of each chapter in that kind of says this is sort of like Dick and Carey, however it has this additional stuff. So those things. There's some unique things in First Principles of Instruction book that I had not written about before. One of them is I kept talking about the fact that I thought that problem solving involved all of the different kinds of learning. And before that, we kind of had these different kinds of learning, kinds of what happens, how to. And for the first time, I really brought it together into a single model. So chapter 6 or 7, whichever in that book that talks about a problem-solving model, really brings together these different kinds of things. And in that sense, I think I've gone beyond Gagné. What Gagné and I tried to do in an article he and I wrote on, I think it was called Enterprise in Instruction. It shows up in the little book of collected readings of his that several people did. We tried to do that, but I think I finally put it together in that book, and that's unique. The only place that appears is in the book. I think that's unique. I think that's not there. The other thing I tried to do that is different from some of the other, like Dick and Carey, I tried to include directions for creating a functional prototype. I think a design spec, a set of guidelines, this is my design spec, and then I hand it over to programmers, never works. It never turns out the way you want it to. And so I said, no, you've got to build a prototype. And so I showed how to build a prototype and then used PowerPoint 210, I think, is an example of a cheap tool you can use to do that. So I think that's fairly unique as well. And then I also tried to incorporate something, we talk a lot about group learning, communities of learning, all this kind of stuff. And so I said, oh, okay, I think this is an important thing. How do I build in student interaction into this? So I tried to combine several areas in the field: online learning, designing prototype, instructional design, and it has elements of both constructivism in that it's problem-centered, but it's also direct instruction, so it's like instructivism and constructivism combined. And then this whole idea of communities of learning. I tried to bring all of these things together into a unified approach to instructional design. Of course, I think it's really a good job.
Thank you very much, Dr. Merrill.